We've all heard the old adage, if you want healthy orchids, you need healthy orchid roots. What exactly does this mean? Well, let's have a little bit of a look into what orchid roots are and how they go about doing their business, and this will help you be able to look after them properly so you can have healthy orchids too. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. And if you're looking at orchid roots for the first time, they actually look quite unusual. They're almost a silvery white color with these like green tips, and you know they're not going to look like that for long. They're going to be brown and soggy after a while, but that's another story. So looking at these white silvery roots with these green tips, they don't look like normal plant root. Well, they're not actually the same. Orchid roots have a velamen, which is the spongy covering that's around the outside. There's other plants that also do have this, like some of the aroids also have this velamen that helps them absorb water from the atmosphere. But this is what you're looking at around the root. It's this spongy velamen cover which is used to absorb moisture, not only from the rain or the watering that you give it, but from the atmosphere itself. What it does is it's got lots of little capillaries in it that the moist air is able to move into, and inside the velamen itself, this then condenses into moisture that the plant can then use. So this is one of the main reasons why you need to ensure that the roots of your orchid are well aerated. We already know that some of your orchids are epiphytic, which means they're growing out on the trees or things like that. Others are lithophytic, which are growing out on rocks and in the rock crevices. And then we also have those terrestrial orchids. Those grow actually in the soil itself. But also, those still have a velamen around them, although you'll notice it's a much thinner velamen layer, and that's why those terrestrial orchids need moisture most of the time. Although not wet, it still needs to be well drained, but they need moisture. Also, you'll notice a lot of the monopodial orchids, such as your Phalaenopsis and your Vandas, how big and thick their roots are in comparison to the others. This is also because they don't have those big storage units, those pseudobulbs that the sympodial orchids like your cattleyas and your oncidiums have to keep moisture long term. The monopodial orchids need to be able to draw up moisture continually to keep feeding all that leaf volume that they have. So that's why they have this thick velamen to be able to draw that moisture straight out of the atmosphere and absorb as much of it as possible when there is rain or water around available for it. And then what's happening underneath this velamen layer? Well, underneath the velamen, there's a layer of cells called the exodermis. This then regulates the flow of water back out from the roots. So it allows the moisture to go in towards the cortex, which is the next layer. And this is where water and nutrients are stored for use by the plant. And the exodermis stops that water or that moisture and those nutrients from being drawn back out into the velamen and back into the atmosphere again. So it's a regulatory layer. And then there's another one on the other side of the cortex called the endodermis, and this then regulates the moisture and nutrients that go into the plant itself. This ensures that the plant is getting a constant supply of the right amount of nutrients continually. And in the center of that is the stele. That's where all the vascular system of the plant is. It's your xylem and your phlegm that move the carbohydrates down and move the water and nutrients up. Talking about carbohydrates, you'll also notice sometimes that these orchid roots go green. This is chlorophyll that is then produced in the roots itself. It helps with photosynthesis, especially with some of those orchids that grow in darker areas or lower light conditions. And they need to be able to get more photosynthesis done to help produce enough energy for growth and flowering. And often the only part of the plant that can really move is the roots. So the roots can grow up long and tall to where more light is available to them, and then start photosynthesizing for the health of the plant. But this is not the only reason that they photosynthesize. Also, the root of orchids often produce symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi. This mycorrhizal fungi help digest nutrients that are in the environment and make them available to the plant in a form that the plant can then use. And in return, what the plant does, it gives the fungi these carbohydrates that the fungi is not able to produce itself. So they work in symbiosis together so that they both can survive well. And it is generally in the early stages of development that the orchids particularly need this mycorrhizal fungi. It's in the germination phases and in the stages leading up to maturity. Often when the orchid is mature, it's able to stretch out those roots far and wide enough to be able to get the nutrients it needs. But while it's still young, it needs that extra help that those mycorrhizal fungi can provide. And with your roots then stretching far and wide as the plant matures, this is also part of the adaptations that the orchid roots have to survive in those low nutrient environments on the branches of trees or in the crags of rocks and things like that, where there's not much nutrient available to them. So it's not only the velamen that is designed to be able to absorb those nutrients quickly, as fast as it can, when they are available, and it also provides that extra surface area on the root itself to be able to find any of those nutrients that might be available in and around the plant. And in these areas where the plant is growing, it needs to be able to absorb those nutrients and that water extremely quickly, because they're not in areas where the water is held for long, and the water or rain will just wash any of those nutrients away. So that's why it's all of these small little capillaries in the velamen that help that water be absorbed passively straight into the plant through that capillary absorption. There's also active absorption that takes place using the aquaporins, so the orchid roots are making the best of both options. And also another function of the velamen is giving the roots the ability to cling onto just about any surface. The velamen, as it grows, is spread and laid flat up against the surface and then adheres onto it. This gives the orchid a really strong adhesion onto the surface that it's on to ensure that it's not just blown away in the wind. Also, if you think about it, when you hear people talking about aerial roots on orchids, if you think about where the orchid would grow naturally, all of its roots are really aerial roots. It's just when we put them into a container and fill that container with a medium, they adapt to a lower light, higher moisture content environment. And if you take roots that have been hanging out in the air and shoving them into a container, this is when you'll start having problems, is those roots aren't adapted to being in that wetter environment with less air movement and slower drying periods. Often these roots that have been so-called aerial roots, as you put them into the container, they will often rot. So if you're looking to get roots into a container, then the best thing to do is start it off as the plant itself is beginning to root. So those roots will grow into that media and naturally adapt themselves to being in it. And you may have noticed that sometimes when you forget to water your orchids for long periods, they almost do better than when you water them regularly. Well, orchids are often very adaptable to drought conditions. So out in the environment, they generally encounter these naturally, and what happens is that water that is available, when it's available, is absorbed as quickly as possible through that velamen and into the plant, where it's then stored with little chance of it being removed from the plant with all those security measures that it's got around it. And then that is used slowly, and the plant can even go into a dormant state during those drier periods until conditions come right for it and it's able to get moisture back again, where it can start active growth again. So this root structure with the velamen on the outside not only absorbs the moisture quickly, but it also insulates the roots itself to stop that moisture from being withdrawn quickly too, along with that exodermis that stops water from being drawn out of the cortex itself. So when we say we want to see healthy roots, we want to see those nice, big, firm, plump roots with that sort of whitish almost, or even green appearance if the roots are photosynthesizing, and preferably with that little green tip, which means that that root is in active growth. And the healthier your roots are, you know, the healthier your plant is going to be. You don't want to see those brown, soggy, mushy, or even those shriveled up brown, blackened roots. Then you know you have some problems. And those are generally from overwatering, inadequate drainage, and poor air circulation. Remember I was explaining to you about those capillaries in that velamen? Well, those need to be kept open and to be allowed to breathe. So now that you understand the anatomy and physiology of your orchid roots, you also understand why the watering is so important. You have to manage that balance between moisture and aeration to ensure healthy roots. Also, the potting media is very important, making sure that there's enough air movement through your potting media and that your potting media will hold enough moisture so that you don't have to water too regularly, but without it staying damp all the time. There has to be good drainage. And also fertilization, understanding that the orchids are generally coming from areas where the nutrition is poor, it's difficult to get hold of. You understand why you need to keep your fertilization to minimum levels, as only certain amounts of it can be absorbed by the plant without it burning. And the plant itself will then regulate how much of that food it's going to use anyway. So now you know why healthy roots will provide a healthy plant. And with this, let's hope you can really get your orchids flourishing. We are regularly posting bonus information up on our Buy Me a Coffee link. And for those of you who need specialized advice, please feel free to subscribe to one of our tiers so we can get back to you there. And thank you for watching. If you have found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing.